What's up, y'all? Talon here. Today I'm going to be going over the top teams from the Victory Road Challenge. The second one in January, we had 233 players in attendance with over a $2,000 prize pool. It was ultimately won by Frederick Hoge-Nielsen, a really strong player using Sneasler on a Miraidon composition, which coming into this format, everyone didn't think Sneasler really had any legs to stand on coming in from a dominant Regulation H, but it's definitely proven itself to be very threatening on this particular team from Frederick. So we're going to be going over that team as well as the rest in the top cut. I have EV spreads for the top 8 teams, so check the description for that. And I'll also go into details on how I EV'd those teams in a second. So if you appreciate the resource of the video, the teams, the analysis, etc., please leave a like on the video, comment, let me know what you want to see in the future, and subscribe to the channel. With all that being said, let's hop into a breakdown of these teams now. So as mentioned in the intro, I do have the EV spreads for all the top 8 players. Check the description below for that. But yeah, these are basically just recreations based off of my estimations of how the team should play, but definitely not going to be the exact same as what was used in the tournament, just because a lot of the players don't make that public afterwards because they have upcoming tournaments, whether online or in person. They don't want to reveal all that information to future opponents. So yeah, for the Miraidon, basically just a very simple EV spread. A lot of the Miraidons mimicking Luca Ceribelli's have gone for the modest kind of bulkier take on Miraidon, but I think on a team like this, it is just fine to go max speed, max special attack, and just try and move first. I think if you're Terra Electric, modest is definitely the way to go. But on the Terra Fairy one, being able to guarantee that you're moving first, or at least speed tying is definitely very threatening, especially when you have the star of the show, the Electric Seed Sneasler next to you, just threatening really, really fast damage on both the physical and the special side. It can be a very dangerous combination. Speaking of the Sneasler, of course, you offer fake out support to your Miraidon, just making sure that people either go for Protect, or if they don't have Protect on a Pokemon, they're just stuck on the field tanking a Electrodrift, Volt Switch, or, Draco Meteor or Dazzling Gleam. No matter what it's going for, it's doing a lot of damage. We also have the Unburden Electric Seed combination, which takes the Electric Seed away from Farigiraf, which is Rocky Helmet on this team, which will make the Farigiraf a lot weaker to the Calyrex Ice teams, but the Sneasler, it just makes it a speedy demon. If your opponent doesn't have Tailwind, they won't have anything on their team to outspeed it. I think maybe if they're Choice Scarf Regieleki, they might outspeed, but I'd still think that... No, actually, I think they would outspeed if they were a Choice Scarf Regieleki, but outside of that, nothing is going to be outspeeding this Sneasler without a Tailwind, so that's very cool. That means you get to go for a close combat or a Gunk Shot before anyone moves. Gunk Shot gets a 1-hit KO on the Ogerpon forms, forces them to go for a Terastallization if they want to live, which is kind of wasteful because they'll probably just fold to the Volt Switch or another attack in combination from the Miraidon. We also have Close Combat, obviously very strong against normal types like Ursaluna Blood Moon, and then the Incineroar, basically just dark types like Incineroar. That's definitely very valuable. Gunk Shot, I didn't mention, also should knock out Rillaboom in one hit, so definitely a lot of benefits. You are risking the 15% chance to miss against those, but definitely worth it. Then last up, which is pretty interesting, is Coaching. You only have one other physical attacker on the team in Iron Hands, but Coaching does have the defensive properties too. You could coach up your Miraidon if you're worried about a physical attacker later in the game. That's definitely an option. You could also coach up the Ursaluna Blood Moon, give it a lot of bulk on the physical side as well, so I do think that you're probably coaching more than the Iron Hands. There's some times where you just don't want to be going for an attack. You can just bulk up your Miraidon on the physical side and then sweep with that later in the game. I want to comment on the Stellar Terra just because that really makes your Sneasler very threatening. You can threaten 1-hit KOs into Incineroar even when you're intimidated. You can go for Terra Stellar, Close Combat, or Gunk Shot while paired with Helping Hand Farigiraf to take knockouts on a lot of restricted Pokemon. Like you'll get Miraidon. Basically, if they aren't invested in a lot of bulk, you should be taking the knockout with either Close Combat or Gunk Shot. It is a lot of resources to commit, going for Helping Hand, Terra Stellar into Gunk Shot, because if you miss, you've just wasted so much of your turn, but definitely a very threatening thing to be on the field. And then looking at the EV spreads, it looks pretty simple, and it kind of is, but I believe the 4 HP and 12 special defense allows you to tank an opposing modest Miraidon's Terra Fairy Dazzling Gleam 100% of the time, or maybe it's like 93.25 I calced it for, but that's definitely very valuable. Then the rest is just dumped into attack, and then there's one EV left over for defense, so you're not really going to be taking hits that well with the Electric Seed. Regardless, you'll now be able to live a Chien-Pao Ice Cold Crash, but the main physical attacker in the format, of course, being Urshifu, critting through the Electric Seed is definitely a bit of a bummer, but against everything else, it turns things that would normally be a 1-hit KO into narrow 2-hit KO, so we do like that a fair bit. The Tornadus on the team is definitely very interesting. It's a Covert Cloak set to dodge Fake Out to allow you to get Tailwind up without worrying about anything. Terra Dark means if you're facing against a faster Taunt user, you can go for that and guarantee Tailwind or a Taunt of your own. You also can combo that with Terra Dark Dark Pulse. I'm not entirely sure what this is hitting outside of, it's probably for Calyrex Shadow Rider now that I say it out loud, which is definitely very valuable. I'm not sure if you need the Terra Dark to KO. Maybe you do. on bulkier variants. And then Bleak Windstorm, very appreciated. Going to be your main offensive stab. I took some EV spreads from another team. I believe the defense allows you to take a Surging Strikes from Urshifu, maybe with Mystic Water or Terra Water. It's one of those. The special attack means you'll one-hit KO a Mystic Water Urshifu if they have no bulk, and the speed allows you to outspeed the Adamant Urshifu, so definitely very Urshifu focused. There's not a lot, outside of the Miraidon, a Surging Strike Urshifu can definitely do a lot of damage to Sneasler, Ursaluna, and Iron Hands, so having the option to just knock that out before it can move is definitely appreciated. We have an Ursaluna Blood Moon, which pairs really well with the Tailwind and the Trick Room mode offered by the Farigiraf, so I'm outspeeding right now max speed Zamazanta, which feels pretty relevant. Usually you won't see a plus speed max speed Zamazanta. They cap out at 180. This also lets you outspeed Ogerpon, so a very quick Ursaluna with a bit of bulk investment as well. And we have some leftover EV, so we put most of that into HP and then stop just shy of 200 so we don't take an additional tick of Life Orb recoil, and then put the remainder in special defense just because it is its lowest defensive stat, and then the remainder point can go in defense. So pretty simple there. The Farigiraf here is EV'd to take a Glacial Lance from opposing Calyrex Ice Rider. It's definitely very important in that matchup, being able to take at least 3 and then hit back with foul plays. Rocky Helmet definitely appreciated against Urshifu if they're ever spamming Surging Strike. That can be valuable, and even taking a Wicked Blow from an opposing Urshifu can be valuable because you'll get rid of their Focus Sash, which means really any of your attacks on any Pokemon can clean it up at that point. You could EV the Farigiraf to survive a non-Terradark Wicked Blow from Urshifu. Here I'm just prioritizing general bulk. I have the speed stat at 82 so that if you are in Tailwind for some reason with the Farigiraf on the field, you can go for a Psychic Noise and outspeed a Jolly Rapid Strike Urshifu and knock that out, or not knock it out, but get pretty close with Psychic Noise. If it's gone for a close combat, you'll knock it out. And then the Iron Hands is here as just a very bulky Pokemon that is obviously the main beneficiary of coaching on the team. But yeah, Quark Drive, coached up Iron Hands, definitely doing a lot of damage. Going to be very difficult to knock out on the defensive side, with the Assault Vest boosting its special defense, and then the coaching boosting the offensive, and then you have the Quark Drive boosted, coaching boosted, Drain Punches, just healing up all your HP. You can imagine this as a very dangerous win condition in and out of Trick Room, or for the EV training on the Iron Hands, I have it outspeeding a Urshifu in Tailwind, which can come up a fair bit, just needing to knock out an Urshifu in one hit if they're an Adamant. Then I've hit a little bit more than the Grassy Terrain healing number, just because you have a Ride on. A lot of players will be bringing the Rillaboom into you, so having the Iron Hands benefit a little bit from that is definitely appreciated. The rest, we're just getting a bump point in attack. You see at 144, it's at 196, and then if we do one more, we get an additional EV spread, an additional EV point from the Adamant nature. The rest we just dump into special defense, and then we have a little left over to put into the defense stat. Frederick had used a team very similar to this earlier in the format. I think got a top 4 or a top 8 at a regional with Chi-Yu over Sneasler. So yeah, definitely was comfortable playing this sort of team, and then switched over to the Sneasler and was able to take the entire tournament for it. So this is the first big finish for Sneasler in Regulation G. I'm not sure if Sneasler will work on anything outside of Miraidon. The Electric Seed does seem pretty critical, but you could pair it with a Rillaboom for Grassy Seed or Indeedee for Psychic Seed and get the speed boost that way. But I think the immediate pressure being offered by the Miraidon really frees up the Sneasler to be very menacing for the opposing team. So overall, really cool team. Congrats to Frederick. If you want to use the team, I have the EV spreads in the description below as mentioned. Moving to the second place team, it's very similar to the team that won last week, so I don't want to go into too much detail. I've actually completely ported the EV spreads. All the Terra types are exactly the same outside of the Urshifu over the Rillaboom slot. This is a very interesting Urshifu single strike going Terra Water. The purpose of the Terra Water, I have to imagine, is to allow you to beat a Calyrex Ice Rider a little bit better. You can ignore the Amoonguss, you can't get Sport or Rage Powdered, and you're threatening them to Terastallize immediately with the Wicked Blow. I'm not sure how much I love that though, just because I feel like the combination of Zamazanta and Amoonguss is already pretty sufficient to beat Calyrex Ice Rider. But as mentioned, I did cover this team last week, so outside of the one Pokemon difference, it is the exact same EV spread, so I don't want to go into too much detail beyond that. Check that video out if you are interested. Moving into the third place team, this is basically the Arubega team that, outside of the Urshifu being Rapid Strike, won the World Championship. This one is the Dark one with Terra Stellar Wicked Blow. You do a ton of damage, Terra Stellar Close Combat, a really deadly weapon against Terapagos, which is kind of annoying from Rhydon because it can go for the Terastallization and wipe away your electric terrain. So having a Urshifu and an Iron Hands to really threaten the opposing Terapagos, whether you're in Trick Room or not, or any other speed conditions, is a cool addition. Beyond that, yeah, very, very much something we've covered before. I believe Yan Sim got top 4 at the previous tournament with this. So yeah, a lot of repeats. I don't want to go into too much detail into them. So check out the previous video if you want a little bit more coverage there. We have another repeat for the top 4. We have a Calyrex Shadow Rider Dondozo composition. Basically, the identity of the team is to set up Toxic Spikes and Poison Gas with the Wheezing early on while threatening with the Calyrex Shadow Rider. Once those poisons are set up, the very bulky Dondozo with the Order Up boosting defensive stats just 1v1s the rest of your opponent's team, alternating Protect and Earthquake a lot of the time, so very annoying team to play against. And in recent weeks, we've seen some innovation on the last slots on the team. The Roaring Moon and the Iron Hands seem to be popular right now. Sometimes Cornerstone Ogerpon over the Iron Hands, but the Roaring Moon does seem like the pretty set 5th to allow the Calyrex Shadow Rider to win in the mirror. The mirror can be definitely very scary, so having the Roaring Moon to threaten a Tailwind to allow you to go for Astral Barrage, and then potentially go for Knockoff or Acrobatics if you don't want to bring the Calyrex Shadow Rider necessarily is very cool. You can also go for Tailwind Poison Gas, Tailwind Toxic Spikes, and guarantee that goes up, so that's cool as well. Then Iron Hands is a very interesting set here. Usually we see Assault Vest Volt Switch to just be able to pivot into the Dondozo and the Calyrex Shadow Rider modes a little bit more fluidly, but here we have a Rocky Helmet set with Terra Poison, and then Fake Out, Drain Punch, Heavy Slam, Electric Terrain, not even Wild Shard, so I'm really not sure what this is going for. This is, beyond my knowledge as someone who hasn't played this archetype from, the player side. I've definitely played against it, but I'm not entirely sure what this is for, but Electric Terrain could be solid against Pokemon that go for sleep. So maybe you're thinking the Calyrex Ice Rider matchup could be kind of hard. I do feel like the Order Up boosting Dondozo could be an issue, but maybe Clear Smog Amoonguss is a problem for the team. So you go for Electric Terrain to block the Spore options, and then you just don't go for the Dondozo mode. You just sweep with the Calyrex Shadow Rider Roaring Moon. I'm not really sure what we're going for here, but definitely let me know in the comments below if you have an idea what this Iron Hand set is for on these Calyrex Shadow Rider Dondozo teams. Going into the top 8, we do see a lot of very similar Zamazanta teams. Zamazanta was the most common restricted Pokemon in day 2. I think it was like at 12 out of 52, so that was about 20% usage. So a very, very good weekend for Zamazanta. And then this team, I believe outside of the Raging Bolt, is the exact same team. That is definitely not Darkest Lariat. I'm going to assume that's Draco Meteor. But yeah, basically this team is the same that Snow won with. It's the same team that I believe I covered at 2nd place outside of the Raging Bolt in place of the Safety Goggles Urshifu. So it does seem like people are experimenting with the Rillaboom slot that was originally on Snow's team. The Raging Bolt definitely gels really well with the Chi-Yu mode on the team, boosting up its Thunderclaps to absurd levels, and just generally being a nuisance to play against. Amoonguss plus the Raging Bolt is a very solid defensive core in addition to the extremely bulky Flutter Mane and Zamazanta, but once again, very similar to a previous team that I covered, so don't want to go into much detail outside of the spread on their Raging Bolt. Here I am running a set with 36 speed to be able to outspeed an Urshifu after if Flutter Mane goes for an Icy Wind against it. Earlier in the game, you might have to go for an Icy Wind and not Moonblast into the Urshifu, so having the option to guaranteed outspeed the Urshifu later in the game with the Raging Bolt is pretty cool. Defensively, this tanks a Glacial Lance from a max attack Calyrex Ice Rider. 44 special defense allows you to, I think, tank a Helping Hand Astral Barrage at +2 from a Calyrex Shadow Rider, which could be important so that you can follow up with a Snarl. Then the rest is dumped into the special attack stat. Zooming out once again, in top 8, we do have an exact copy of the open team sheet of Snow. Not going to say it's the exact same EV spreads, but I more or less just copied my EV spreads here, so I don't want to go into any detail on that, as I've already covered it outside of one Pokemon twice at this point in the video. So if you have noticed a lot of teams repeating from previous online tournaments, if you've watched previous videos, that is because most people will bring more innovative stuff at IRL tournaments. Birmingham is coming up next week, and then San Antonio 2 weeks after that, or 2 weeks from now. So both European and American players are hiding their strongest teams, just kind of practicing privately or on the ladder, not bringing them to tournaments where it's very, very public, which means that although good Pokemon's definitely being played in these tournaments, we're not seeing a lot of innovation outside of Fredericks winning this tournament. And then this next team is actually very innovative, definitely makes me eat my words a little bit, but one of the few examples of that in this top cut outside of Frederick, we have a very offensive Kyogre team with a Choice Scarf Kyogre, which isn't that uncommon. I think it was pretty, throughout the top 32 at the World Championship and the top 64, there were a lot of very crazy Choice Scarf and Choice Specs Kyogre teams. There was a few Assault Vest as well, but yeah, basically the focus is to use the very offensive mode from the Tornadus and the Kyogre to overwhelm more defensive teams. You have Serena with Queenly Majesty to block any priority like Grassy Glide, which would really put a damper on your Water Spout, as well as Fake Outs, which could block you from moving at all. And then you can lead the Serena if you want to, and just go for Helping Hand, Water Spout. That's very threatening with Terra Water against a lot of teams. For example, I think it probably knocks out a Calyrex Ice Rider if they don't have defensive investment and a defensive Terra of Water or Grass. So That's a cool option against some teams. You have Terra Ice as a defensive Terra against Glacial Lance from Calyrex Ice Rider, as well as a very strong offensive Terra with Triple Axle into Amoonguss and Rillaboom. That's awesome. Power Whip also very good against water types like Urshifu. They'll do a lot to you with close combat, but having the option to damage back with a Power Whip is definitely appreciated as well. Electabuzz on the team is your main defensive backbone. You can go for Follow Me to block any Grassy Glides safely against a Rillaboom if you don't have the Serena or you don't want to switch it in, as well as any other attacks from opposing Pokemon. And then offensively, we have Feint to be able to block any Protects. If people are trying to shuffle around defensively, you can read that and go for a Feint Water Spout or just attack with anything else. Thunder is cool because it just guarantees a 1-hit KO on Urshifu pretty much regardless of what bulk they run. You could run Force Special Attack to give yourself a little bit, like a 75% chance to an 83% chance to knock out a 92 HP Urshifu, I believe, if they're running like a Mystic Water set with a little bit of bulk, but I don't think that's really necessary. A lot of them are Focus Sash, and you can kind of just take the favorable roll even if they are a little bit bulky and finish them off next turn with Feint. For the EV spreads, I have the max defense that will get you any ground gain basically on living a Terra Water, Adamant, Surging Strikes, and the Rain from Urshifu, which is obviously going to be pretty common since you're setting up Rain for them, and then the rest is just dumped in the special defense stat. So not super complex, just trying to take Surging Strikes a little bit better, as well as Glacial Lances from Calyrex. The Tornado set is about what you'd expect. It's a Focus Sash set with Tailwind and Rain Dance, the Tailwind allowing the Kyogre to outspeed the faster Pokemon in the format. Other Choice Scarf Pokemon that are faster, like maybe a Timid Chi-Yu, or Regieleki, for example, you need a Tailwind to outspeed even with Choice Scarf. Then you have Rain Dance for opposing Sunny Day users or Drought users like Groudon, which are kind of picking up in usage. It's definitely important to have Rain Dance on this set. Bleak Wind is just your really strong damage option. With Terra Flying and Max Special Attack, you can do a ton of damage if you don't go for a Terra on another Pokemon on the team. And then Protect is a good defensive option. Now for the really interesting Pokemon on the team, we have an Archaludon with Stalwart and Safety Goggles. And you might imagine, okay, why Safety Goggles if you can already ignore a Amoonguss's Rage Powder and any other Follow Me Pokemon? But I do think this is very important to have a safe matchup against Calyrex Ice Rider, and just having the option to ignore Fake Out on that lead is cool. With Terra Ghost, you have safety Goggles to ignore a Protect Spore play, and you can ignore any Follow Me user like an Ogerpon with Stalwart and force a Terrestrialization with Steel Beam, because that will just knock out a Calyrex in one hit regardless. So if you have forced the Calyrex Ice Rider to go for the Terrestrialization, if they are Terra Water, suddenly Electroshot is just a very safe option to them and does a ton of damage. And if they're Terra Fire, which is another common Terrestrialization, of course, Kyogre is definitely going to be very appreciative of that. On the EV side, I'm just outspeeding an Adamant Urshifu in Tailwind with the speed. And then defensively, I think this is just meant to live both Life Orb Astro Barrage from Calyrex Shadow Rider a good amount of the time, and then Terra Fairy Dazzling Gleam from Luca's Modest Miraidon at Worlds. And then the last Pokemon on the team is the Grimmsnarl, which is very interesting. It is running a Terra Stellar Assault Vest set with Pickpocket. If you're on Battle Stadium, Frisk would be the better ability, but with no prankster moves, basically no status moves, we have to go Pickpocket here to get any value ever, which is only going to happen, I think, if you knock off the Assault Vest first, which could come up, I guess. It's better than Frisk in most circumstances, but outside of that, running a bit of speed to outspeed a Landorus Incarnate in Tailwind and being able to hit it with a Spirit Break and do a ton of damage, as well as bulk yourself up defensively. On the special defensive side, the bulk is just to be able to live a Miraidon Dazzling Gleam from full with the Assault Vest active. Offensively, I'm running Adamant Max Attack just because with Terra Stellar Spirit Break, you can knock out Urshifu, but it's kind of you do want to make sure that your max attack in case they have a little bit of bulk just to guarantee that roll. So very creative team, a very offensive take on Kyogre, whereas in an earlier Regulation G and even more commonly now, it feels like the more defensive Incineroar, Amoonguss, Rillaboom, Roaring Moon team is just way more popular, which is quite a defensive switch heavy team, but yeah, way more offensive take on Kyogre here. Now for the last team in the top 8, we have Julio's Calyrex Shadow Rider team. Nothing too crazy here. It is a spell tag set, which I like to run at max special attack just because if you get a +3 boost, you have a 1-hit KO on even specially defensive Calyrex Ice Rider after they've gone for the Terrestrialization. So I think that's definitely worthwhile, as well as being strong in the mirror. You could, speed it down to around 207, 206 to be able to outspeed Miraidon still, and then maybe lower some special attack and get some bulk in there, but I just like to run at max speed myself, but definitely open to changes there. The Incineroar on this team is pretty interesting. Usually we've seen a lot of Rocky Helmet with this Terra Water set, but now we have Covert Cloak to be able to dodge any fake outs from opposing Rillaboom or opposing Incineroar, so that's pretty cool. You'll definitely have the advantage in that mirror. We have Fake Out, Parting Shot, Knockoff, and usually we'll see a Will-O-Wisp on this slot. But we have Helping Hand here to really further boost the Calyrex Shadow Rider. For example, if we get that one Nasty Plot up, we don't need an additional boost to knock out the Calyrex Shadow Rider. We can just go for Helping Hand and really guarantee that at that point. On the defensive side, this is a spread that basically lives any Surging Strikes from Urshifu if they're not Mystic Water or Terra Water, which is nice, just having the security that you're either going to force the resource of them going for that Terastallization or just live the hit and be able to go for a knockoff, Parting Shot, or a Helping Hand that turn pretty safely. Next up, we have a Raging Bolt with Assault Vest Electroweb, which is definitely solid for mirrors, just not having to necessarily go for the Terastallization to Dark. A lot of the time you will anyways, but having the option to slow down opposing Pokemon for the rest of your team, like the Ogerpon and the Urshifu, can definitely be appreciated in a scramble when your Calyrex Shadow Rider gets knocked out unexpectedly, needing your Electroweb to basically slow down opposing Choice Scarf Urshifus or Calyrex Shadow Riders is definitely nice to let yourself just clean them up with your own Urshifu and Ogerpon. Beyond that, pretty familiar spread. I'm running the same defensive investment to live a Glacial Lance from Calyrex, speed to be able to outspeed a Chi-Yu after an Electroweb, and then the rest is mostly just dumped into special defense and special attack. Amoonguss, a very simple spread on this team, just living a Calyrex Ice Rider max attack Glacial Lance 100% of the time, or maybe it's like 93% of the time. And then the rest is dumped into special defense. Next, we have an Urshifu Rapid Strike with Terra Stellar. Terra Stellar, definitely a great weapon against Terapagos, allowing you to chip it down, and then even if you are intimidated, have a good chance to knock out with a Terra Stellar Close Combat. Later in the game, outside of that, don't want to comment on too much. Running the max speed on this set allows you to actually outspeed Calyrex Shadow Rider after an Electroweb, so as mentioned, that it's a pretty important component if the Shadow Rider of your own goes down. And then the Ogerpon in this team is just running max attack, max speed with a Jolly to make sure that you're outspeeding opposing bulky Terra Fire Ogerpon, which are pretty common. Speaking on the Ogerpon over what is more typically a Ogerpon Heart Flame, maybe this is teching for the mirror, just be able to threaten Incineroar a little bit better while being able to ignore Amoonguss still, while still being able to threaten opposing Urshifu and Ogerpon Hearth Flame very easily with Horn Leech and Ivy Cudgel. Yeah, definitely was able to take Julio pretty far here. And really the main differentiator over this Calyrex Shadow Rider team from other ones, as well as Helping Hand on the Incineroar, but beyond that, definitely plays like a pretty standard, just balancy Calyrex Shadow Rider build. I didn't have a lot of time this week to actually recreate all the teams from the top 16 like I usually do, but I do want to go into some of the more interesting ones. This team went 9-0 by Fengze. Interesting take on Groudon with Assault Vest. Very physically oriented with a Chien-Pao Urshifu with Choice Band and Gouging Fire. How boosting up the damage output on the Groudon, as well as having the Breaking Swipe to lower the attack stats on Pokemon, and Assault Vest to allow you to take hits on the special side. Definitely makes the Groudon very difficult to deal with, both defensively and offensively. With a combination of Photosynthesis, Clear Amulet, and Howl and Sun being up, I have to imagine that's really difficult for opposing Calyrex Shadow Rider teams to handle after you go for Terra Normal, so that's pretty cool. And then just being a Pokemon a lot of people aren't familiar playing against, so yeah, the calcs against that Pokemon probably aren't super in opposing players' favor, like they don't know how much damage it's going to do, whereas you as the Gouging Fire player do kind of have an idea. Maybe with Sword of Ruin, Flare Blitz does just knock it out in Sun, so that's a cool option for sure. I do like the Urshifu with the Choice Band Terra Dark with the combination of Tailwind Volcarona. So you can go for the Tailwind with the Volcarona, maybe it goes down, or maybe you just switch in the Urshifu. But once it's in and you have that Choice Band Terra Dark Wicked Blow option there, that's going to be very difficult for a lot of teams to handle. The Volcarona seems kind of difficult for opposing Calyrex Ice Rider teams to handle, which is one of Groudon's worst matchups in my opinion. The Rocky Helmet Terra Water means you're going to be really solid against Calyrex Ice Rider. You can go for Will-O-Wisp into them as well, so that's cool, and then Rage Powder into Pokemon that are just trying to single target the rest of your team. Like, I could imagine Zamazanta being an issue for the Groudon, Gouging Fire, and Urshifu if they have the right Terra type, but with the option to Will-O-Wisp it, and then having the Raging Bolt, you can basically Rage Powder away any damage into the Volcarona and hit either the Zamazanta with a Thunderbolt if they have not Terastallized, and if they have, usually they're Terra Dragon at this point, so a Draco Meteor will just knock them out. Yeah, this Groudon team was definitely something I had my eye on as being one of the cooler teams to come out of the tour. Outside of that, a lot of repeat of this in previous weeks. This Calyrex Ice Rider team, one of the few ones to do well. I believe this is pretty much just Patrick Connor's Nationals winning team outside of the Incineroar being replaced by an Ogerpon Cornerstone here. Beyond that, we have Professor Ragna using something that's pretty similar to Joe Ugarte's Groudon team from previous weeks, which kept doing well in successive tournaments outside of the Urshifu Dark being replaced by a Chien-Pao, and then the Fluttermane replacing, I want to say, a Hearthflame Ogerpon. So yeah, another Groudon team, and then this is the other team in top 16 that I wanted to cover. Outside of that, everything is pretty similar to things we've seen before outside of the Glastrier on the Miraidon. I didn't notice that before, truthfully, so we'll go into that in a second. So here we have a wild take on Calyrex Ice Rider. We have the Choice Scarf Urshifu paired with the Chien-Pao, which is cool. But on the Chien-Pao, we have Haze to be able to handle opposing Dondozo, which is fair enough. That's definitely a team that's popping up a fair bit in these cuts. Then we have Ursalu, not Ursaluna, don't get it twisted, with a Yawn on it, which is pretty atypical. Usually you'll have Protect, guarantee you get Flame Orb up. But running Yawn here, I guess, gives you, in addition to Spore, 2 sleeping options on the team to allow you to set up with Swords Dance Calyrex Ice Rider, which is kind of crazy. This is obviously pretty weak into opposing Zamazanta, just because if they go for Wide Guard, they can completely wall out your Calyrex Ice Rider regardless of how many Swords Dances you have up, but you can't put it to sleep, and even a Dauntless Shield boosted up Zamazanta isn't going to love taking +6 Glacial Lances even when it's resisted, so I guess you have that option there. It's definitely a very physically oriented offensive team, and as a result, I believe it did ultimately lose to a Zamazanta in the top cut, but yeah, it definitely has some means to get around it. You just have to be very creative in your play. But yeah, this is definitely one of the wilder teams in the cut. And yeah, once again, a lot of repeat teams, a lot of Zamazanta, as you can see, and then the Groudon team with a, oh my goodness, we have a Glastrier with Chilling Neigh, Leftovers, Icicle Crash, Body Press, Iron Defense, Tear Water. So Groudon, another Pokemon that tends to be very, very weak to opposing Calyrex Ice Rider. So looking at the team, it does look fairly standard for a Groudon team. I don't think Rillaboom is necessarily that common, but yeah, basically just 5 Pokemon that really can't deal with Terrifier, Calyrex Ice Rider that well at all. And then the Glastrier, which allows you to pretty much just 1v1 Calyrex Ice Rider with Leftovers, Tear Water. I guess you don't have to Tear Water in front of them at all, but it is just there for opposing Fire-type Pokemon. And then we have Body Press, Iron Defense to just be able to completely obliterate them defensively. So that's cool tech. I'm not entirely sure how well, at this point it doesn't really matter. Calyrex Ice Rider isn't that common in tournaments, at least deeper. But hey, definitely a cool weapon to deal with more physically based restricted Pokemon. So that's going to do it for our coverage of this Victory Road tournament, with the Sneasler Miraidon composition ultimately coming out on top. Of course, as mentioned, if you want to use the teams yourself, I have them in the description. If you like the video, let me know in the comments below what you want to see below. Let me know what that Iron Hands was doing on this 3rd place team for sure. If you want to see more, of course, subscribe to the channel. With all that being said, I hope you guys have a good one. Peace, y'all.